In this Writer's Toolbox video, I'll be talking about clear evidence. So you've read something, and you know something. Your teacher asks you, how do you know? How do you know? It's evidence. Evidence is something true that confirms your claim. These are going to be the words of authors, whether they're fiction or non-fiction. Let's look at an example. This is John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. Now, the story is set in the Great Depression, 1930s America, when the economy crashed, there's no jobs. And on top of this, it's in the South, where there was racial segregation and the Dust Bowl, a series of dust storms which destroyed farms and caused people to move. Now, the protagonist is Tom Joad and his friend Jim Casey, and they move to California from Oklahoma in search of new work. But when they get there, they find that everyone's being exploited by landowners for whom they work. That's what the story's about. Now, you're reading, and you get to chapter 15, and you know that the author, John Steinbeck, portrays the negative effects of poverty through the use of imagery. That's what you know. Your teacher comes in. How do you know? Well, you've got the text. That's your evidence. Let's have a look at an excerpt. A 1926 Nash sedan, that's a car, pulled wearily off the highway. The back seat was piled nearly to the ceiling with sacks, with pots and pans, and on the very top, right up against the ceiling, two boys rode. On the top of the car, a mattress and a folded tent poles tied along the running board. The car pulled up to the gas pumps. A dark-haired, hatchet-faced man got out slowly, and the two boys slid down from the load and hit the ground. May walked around the counter and stood in the door. The man was dressed in grey wool trousers and a blue shirt, dark blue with sweat on the back and under the arms. The boys in overalls and nothing else, ragged, patched overalls. Their hair was light and it stood up evenly all over their heads, for it had been roached. Their faces were streaked with dust, and they went directly to the mud puddle under the hose and dug their toes into the mud. The little boys took the hose from him and they upended it and drank thirstily. The man took off his dark, stained hat and stood with a curious humility in front of the screen. "Could you see your way to sell us a loaf of bread, ma'am?" Now, what's the best evidence that you can use? Because there's a lot of imagery there, and we have to be very selective because we want to say a lot about a little, so we're going to just pick the best bits. Well, this is what I've chosen. Pulled wearily off the highway. The personification making us feel tired. The fact that the car is filled with a mattress and a folded tent, showing that they're homeless. A hatchet-faced man got up slowly. This hatchet face, as if he's hard-working, likened to a hatchet, similar to an axe. And the fact that he got slowly out. His clothes that were dark blue with sweat on the back and under the arms. And the family's faces streaked with dust. The fact the little boys took the hose and drank thirstily. That's what I want to use to support my claim that through imagery, Steinbeck depicts poverty. There we go then. In chapter 15, Steinbeck portrays the negative effects of poverty through the use of imagery. This can be seen when Steinbeck says, pulled wearily off the highway, and that on top of the car was a mattress and a folded tent. Steinbeck writes that the hatchet-faced man got slowly out. Also, he says, dark blue with sweat on the back and under the arms. Their faces were streaked with dust and stained hat. What? Does the reader of my work understand this evidence? No, they don't. Without something, people reading your work, if you use these quotes just on their own, they won't understand because they might not have read Grapes of Wrath. What you need to do is you need to provide context. The who, what, when, where, why, how, the backstory. So who? It's a family of migrants who have lost their job. What? Well, they stop at a diner to get supplies whilst travelling across the country. Why? To find work. When? During the Great Depression. Where? A diner on Route 66. And how? Desperately. This context will help the readers of your work understand these quotes. So in the chapter, A family of migrants who are travelling across the country to find work after losing their jobs stop at a diner for supplies. Steinbeck says they pull wearily off the highway and that on top of the car, blah, 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 blah. Have I embedded the author's words into my sentences? I've got context now. I've given the reader enough to kind of understand the quotes, but it still feels like there's two people writing, me and the author. I want it to feel like there's one person writing everything, where I blend the author's words into mine, otherwise known as embedding. Look at it now. In the chapter, a family of migrants who have lost their jobs and are travelling across the country to find work stop at a diner for supplies. They pull wearily off the highway in a car that has a mattress and a folded tent on the roof. The father is a hatchet-faced man who moves slowly and is dressed in a shirt with sweat on the back and under the arms. The boys wear a stained hat and the family's faces are streaked with dust. Upon getting out of the car, the boys thirstily drank from a hose. Have I given the author credit for their words? Well, it's on page 165. I know the author's John Steinbeck, so I put in my citations. Wrong. I don't need them everywhere. I just need them at the very end of the pieces of evidence, the sentence that I'm giving. Now, if we look at this now, it's embedded. I have summarized what is happening with who, what, when, where, why, and how. I have used the author's words and put them into my summary. It makes sense and it feels as though one person is writing it. And I've cited my source. Remember, support your claims with evidence. Use only evidence that is relevant. Provide context so that your reader can understand that evidence. Embed or blend the author's words into your sentences. Now they must be grammatically correct and make sense. And then give the author credit by citing at the end. You answer questions like, how do I know? What is the best piece of evidence that I can use? Does the reader of my work understand this evidence? Have I embedded and blended the author's words into my own sentences so it feels as though it's all me writing? Remember, you're the one being graded, not the author. And have you given credit to the author for their words?